Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, the public affairs program here at Catamount Radio. Each and every Sunday, we present to you community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and political arenas. I'm Brian Collamore, your host, and our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. We're looking forward to the 179th Fair coming up August 12th through the 16th at the fairgrounds here in Rutland, the Vermont State Fair. So the goal of the program to inform and make our listeners aware of things that are going on not just in Rutland County but throughout the state. And the legislature now in its final weeks, maybe final 6-7 weeks, we're hoping for adjournment at some point in May. And we'll be giving you more information about some of the laws that will take effect on July 1st. Some of them take effect on passage. Today, we're very happy to have back, and I think it was December when we last spoke with Devon Neary, who's the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. At least that was where I look back on my notes. I think you were here just before Christmas, actually, December 22nd. So welcome in, Devon.
Thanks for having me, Brian, and it's good to be back. Yeah, it seems like just the other day, but a lot has happened between now and December.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you folks at the Planning Commission have been working for, well, quite a long time now on a master plan sort of thing. Took some data collection information from people who responded, and then had some public engagement, and then put together a plan. And I think people are waiting to hear what's going on.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to talk about it. It has been quite an effort. Starting all the way back in summer of 2023 is when we started the 2026 Rutland Regional Plan update, and we've been working diligently all along. And before I get into it, I've got to really give a shout out to our staff, because what folks probably don't realize is all of our other work supporting towns, implementing state programs, none of that changes. That doesn't go away, and this plan added on to that is just a huge effort. So to all of our staff at the RPC, really kudos, and we're so lucky to have such a dedicated professional team over at the RPC. So we are just completing another revision of the plan, and this revision of the plan will actually be the version that gets released to the entire public in May and June for our big and final public engagement series of events. So we've gone through 2 phases already. So we started, as you said, with the learn and assess phase. That was our earliest engagement. That had the big public survey. We really wanted to understand where the priorities were from around the region and how we could specialize this plan to be not only specific but adaptable, so that a town like Mount Tabor with 210 people and a city of Rutland with 16,000 could share a plan and still see themselves in that plan. The next round was report back. That was in winter of last year. We collated all that information and created our first draft policies, and then we released those policies for public review. We got a lot of good comments back, and now we've taken all of that and incorporated it into the full draft plan. And it's 10 chapters that relates everything from water quality and energy to transportation and community facilities and everything in between. And that draft will be put into our final sort of layout form, so all our graphics and visuals and maps will be in that. And we're doing something really unique this time around, actually. Understanding that this plan is highly technical, and not everyone from the public is going to want to read 200 plus pages of planning documents. So we've made 3 levels of accessibility that we're pretty excited about. So at the most dense, complicated level, you can read the entire draft of the plan. If you're interested, we expect that more towns and public officials will probably take that level of depth and read it, and of course our Board of Commissioners. after that, there's a lighter review where we've made chapter summaries. So a one-page sheet that summarizes sort of the current conditions, the future trends, and the policies for every chapter. That's a way more digestible for the average person and reader to understand, okay, this is what this means, this is what it is going to do. Because again, this plan is not only visionary, but it is regulatory, especially with helping to create policies that encourage and support development throughout the region. And then lastly, and this is kind of the fun thing that we're doing this time around, the highest level of review, in which will be the foundation for our pop-up events, we hired a cartoonist to take our policies and draw out a map of the region that visualizes each of our policies, at least the big ones, throughout the region in context. So, for example, it will kind of look like some of those old jigsaw puzzle maps of Vermont that sort of say like Pico and Killington have a little picture of a skier, Lake Bomazine, a little picture of a wakeboarder or something. This one has, images that reflect policies around housing and transportation in context within a town so folks can really understand it. And what we plan to do at these pop-up events, which largely these events throughout the region will just draw awareness to the fact that the draft is available for review. And we're seeking some feedback on that draft formally through surveys. But we're going to do a caption contest where each of these pictures has a blank bubble of what they would say, and we want the region to fill that in with hopes that, we can get some understanding of like, okay, this policy does reflect that person. So that's sort of the fun side of where we're at with the draft. The more nitty-gritty side is we have to have this draft before our board in June for them to review. And normally we take a summer break with our board because they've been so dedicated this year. In July and August, I don't think we're going to be able to do that this year. We need them back to continue to review the plan because they have to preliminarily adopt this plan in September, because from September to April, that's how long the adoption process takes for this plan now. So 6 solid months of public hearings, state agency review, land use review board review, public service department review, and then finally it comes back to our board in April for the final adoption, April of 2026. So there will be tons of opportunities for folks to weigh in. We're going to try to hit the big major events in May and June with our pop-ups. So look for us throughout the region. We'll have a table set up at a lot of events, and it should be a really, really good time.
Now, is it at a point where the policies have been decided and there won't be any changes to them, or can people still kind of weigh in and say, boy, that doesn't look exactly like what I thought was going to happen, kind of thing?
Absolutely. Not only can they weigh in now, but through the hearing process in October, there is an opportunity to make additional changes. Now, we've been lockstep with our regional plan committee and our board of commissioners, which, for those folks who aren't aware, every one of your towns in Rutland region appoint a commissioner to our board from their select board that represents the town and votes on these sort of policy decisions. So there will be opportunities, long story short, to change the policies and the plan. However, we've done preloaded so much engagement that we have gotten really significant support around the draft up to this point. So we're feeling really good about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to just add, how many are on the board? And if I remember correctly, when you were probably in December, but before that, you got input from every town, as I recall.
That is correct. So there are 27 members of our board representing all 27 towns in the region. And the first survey, we wanted to get a certain percentage from every single town, and we were able to hit that. So we feel like we have gotten that. In addition, every round of engagement so far we've done, we have gone to every select board during that phase and done a meeting, which brings me to the bigger effort that's about to unfold over the next 2 months, which is, we've been talking about this forever, an update to our regional future land use map. And this ties in directly with the changes to Act 250. Mm-hmm. So Act 181, for folks at home, did three major things. It reformed Act 250 to be jurisdictional or location-based. It changed the state designation program to consolidate and reduce down to only 3 areas. And then it changed the regulatory authority of the regional future land use map that lives in this regional plan. So this regional future land use map now lays out the areas we want to grow and the areas we want to conserve. And those areas that want to grow, we're now in the phase of meeting with every single town over the next 2 months to make sure the map looks right, make any tweaks we need to make, and get towns who are eligible to opt in to the Tier 1 status. So Tier 1A and 1B are those 2 tiers of Act 250 now that allow for exemptions to Act 250. Tier 1A for our largest communities in the state, which most likely in our region will at least be Rutland City, could be more, that they actually have to apply to the Land Use Review Board starting the beginning of 2026. That will be fully Act 250 exempt within the planned growth areas. So for Rutland City, it's basically the entire city, besides like Pine Hill Park and that kind of rural area down by Park Street. Outside of Tier 1A, Tier 1B will be Act 250 exempt for 50 units or less on 10 acres or less. So really supporting that housing. And again, that'll be really concentrated in our planned growth, downtown, village, and village areas. And what's really exciting about this effort is originally our downtowns and villages that are designated through the region, we had many of them, but they only constituted about 1.5% of the region, and very few, let's say, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but let's say 20% of the buildings. Through this mapping effort, we were able to expand those areas. Now they encompass more than 40% of the buildings in the region and encompass 4.5% of the landmass, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about the region, 75% of it is forest, right? So that's not where we're going to have, significant housing. Think of like the Green Mountain Range and, Killington, Shrewsbury, all the way down. So there's building and development constrained land that can't be developed. However, the ones that the state has enabled us to develop through this legislation, we could see a significant expansion of that area. And I'm excited because, these are the areas we think about, like downtown Brandon and surrounding area, downtown Fairhaven, downtown Poultney, Wallingford, West Rutland, Proctor, Pittsford. So the places we know about and sort of conceptualize as our sort of growth villages in downtown. So this expansion, we're hoping, knock on wood, Brian, we still haven't seen it to the level that we need it. Hopefully we'll unlock a new level of development, especially for housing that we haven't seen, but we also need that commercial development too, drastically. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be meeting with all 27 towns to go over those maps, and this is really the meat and potatoes of what we're doing through this effort, and we're excited about it.
We're talking to Devon Neary, who is the Executive Director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, or sometimes shortened to just RPC. Couple of questions come up. If I am not living here now, but I buy property, let's just say I buy 10 or 11 acres and want to build a house, but it's in a Tier 3 location, am I prohibited from doing that?
That's a great question, Brian. So right now, the Land Use Review Board, was stood up at the beginning of this year. They are quickly moving through the rulemaking process. And from what I understand, last week, they just formalized the committee and are going to be working on the structure. So regional planning commissions have nothing to do with Tier 3. We're not even mapping it. It will be an overlay map over our current or our future land use map that we'll be creating. From what I understand, they haven't made a decision yet as to how they're going to treat Tier 3. It could be as much as it's a normal Act 250 procedure with extra scrutiny, or it just might be the normal Act 250 procedure. I have yet to hear that they're going to prohibit development altogether. Okay. However, I think everything's on the table. What we're really trying to do right now, because I agree, this area to talk about with towns is it's sensitive, right? Because we don't have answers, and it's really independent of us to know that this is completely distinct from our future land use map that designates rural conservation areas. Rural conservation can still have housing. It can still do anything that you can do now. The Tier 3 is really where the rubber will meet the road. My hope is that, we talk about percentages and, hey, if we have 4.5% of the region that we're really identifying as significant growth, in my mind, Tier 3 should not be a bigger percentage. It should not. Already we have, like I said, 75% of the region that's rural. These areas should be, in my mind, limited to critical natural resources like Class 1 wetlands and elevations above 3,000 feet in those areas that we really, really, really want to protect, not just blanket the entire region, because that's the last thing we need.
Okay. And then on the other side of things, the Tier 1A, and you mentioned Rutland City is in that area, is very useful for, well, I'll just phrase it the way a lot of people think about it, getting government the heck out of the way so that
Amen.
Development can occur. And we've got an amazing project downtown. I call it the Belden Project, but what's been the pit for over 50 years will eventually, we hope, VEPSI has already approved it. There'll be a hotel there again, as there once was. When I first moved here, the Berwick was there. And then it burned in, I think, 73. I
think it's 52 years. It's been
something like that. So that's a good part of what we passed as Act 181. And it will allow development to occur without the restrictions that normally accompany that in terms of Act 250. And that's going to be a big, big project. Not as big as the Killington one. And I don't know whether Killington is 1A or not, but the village center up there is going to be, a 20 or 25-year project before it's completely done. And that, again, is, I think, people there have been trying to do that for decades.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just never gained any traction. But I think it is finally going to happen.
I agree with you. And, I've been saying for years, since I joined the RPC and certainly since I became director, success to me looks like when we start having cranes in our downtowns and villages again. When we see that real development. We haven't seen a crane in Rutland other than replacing an AC unit since Community College of Vermont. And that's just far too long because the potential is so, so great. This hotel will be, in my mind, the catalyst that we need to create confidence in developers. Developers need to see it done and done well and for it to all pencil out. And I think the Beldens are paving that way for everybody. In the Killington, it remains to be seen on whether there'll be 1A or not and whether that 1A status will even extend far enough to exempt the development that's being proposed. I have a feeling it'll be, right on the edge. Either way, this development could be the largest in the history of Vermont. And there's no way that it won't benefit the entire region. Sure, people are apprehensive about some aspects of it and what it could mean. And I've heard people reference Park City, Utah a lot. But if we do it the way we know we can do it in Vermont, I think it will, rising tide floats all boats. This is our rising tide. So we got to take advantage of it. So good things happening. And, one thing to just kind of speak to quickly too is, that legislation enabled interim exemptions to Act 250 that are in place now. And it is working. It's slow, but it is working. We've seen more housing projects through this interim exemption pop up than we've seen in years. So if we can keep that momentum, hopefully we'll get towards our goal, which is steep. Right now, our housing target for our region by 2050 ranges from 8,000 to 16,000 units, which to me, that might as well be 1 million. Because for reference, we only have 30,000 units in the region. So we're saying we're going to increase our total housing by 50% by 2050. Something significant's got to change because right now we're only building about 150 new units a year. Yeah. So,
again, we're talking to Devon Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. We need to take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection. We will do that and be back with Devon in just a moment. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore. Thank you, by the way, for joining us. And today we're talking with Devon Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. And we talked a lot about the plan, the master plan that will be unveiled. Well, let's see, this show will air April 20th, so it'll be available for public viewing probably in May and June, from what I'm remembering Devon saying earlier. And there'll be some other engagement. People can still weigh in and say, boy, that's not the way I thought it was going to go. And that's a good question I'll ask Devon later on, is if there are any great surprises that came out of the data collection that was done prior to putting the plan together. But I do want to mention a couple of things that I know are coming up. And again, the Planning Commission has 27 members, the board, and they meet and talk constantly with the 27 towns in the regional planning area. But you also have select board, I guess you call them meetups, right? Mm-hmm. With local legislative bodies to make sure that people are all on the same page. And the League of Cities and Towns, I think, was doing similar work too, right? Yeah.
So this effort started with a collaboration between Vermont League of Cities and Towns and the RPCs. I'll actually give a shout out to our leader, Ted Brady from the VLCT. It was his sort of brainchild, because we noticed that select boards throughout the state are being tasked with more and more, even our smallest 3-member bodies like West Haven, and they're so busy that there's no time for them to sort of network and coordinate with the towns around them, even the abutting towns. There hasn't been the space for them to do that. So VLCT and the RPCs have teamed up, and they're holding one of these select board meetups in a different region every month throughout 2025. So we were lucky, since I'm chair of VAPTA, which is the organization that oversees all the RPCs, or is part of the RPCs. We got to host the first one. So in January 16th, we held one at West Rutland Town Hall. We had about 15 towns represented, and 20 or so select board members show up and participate in this effort. And really, it's at the most basic level a chance for folks to just be out of a public meeting, eating pizza, and just, sharing experiences and lessons and information from their time as select board members. And then we jump into a specific topic. So the first meeting, it was wide open. We heard about shared services, appointments, bulk buying, everything you could think of. It started with, dog wardens and dog licenses, and ended with regional governance. So we talked about everything in between. And it was really encouraging, because that conversation was dense and really rich throughout the entire hour and a half. And at the end of it, be careful what you wish for. They looked to me and said, Devon, we'd like to do this quarterly. So I said, yeah, of course, we're going to support that, and we'll help organize it. So we just held our second one last week at the town of Castleton, actually in their new recreation department building, which is a former village school. And I got to say, they're doing incredible stuff over there. If there's one benefit to school consolidation, it's the adaptive reuse of these buildings as community assets. The programming in Castleton's incredible. But all that aside, this time we had more than 30 sign up and participate. And I think we had, 15 plus towns represented. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but this time around we focused primarily on shared services because it was clear from that first meeting that towns want to talk about how they can reduce the tax burden by creating efficiencies and understanding that not every single town needs to own a grader. Not every single town needs to have a paid position for like DPW administration or everything under the sun. So it was a really cool conversation, and it was interesting how this stuff is happening already. Brian, we've talked a lot about regional governance and council on governments and all the things that are sort of swirling at the State House and in legislative studies right now. But seeing it and hearing it play out on the ground was spectacular, because ultimately the reason this isn't happening at a larger scale in between towns is the burden it places to do one-off agreements. The one that we sort of were talking about is, Mendon and Rutland Town co-own a chipper and a roadside mower, and like that seems so basic to the average person, but that is a significant savings for those two towns that would otherwise have to buy this expensive equipment on their own. But the administrative burden that presents to do these agreements for every piece of equipment or every department, right now statute doesn't really enable us to do this on a large scale. So we're hopeful that we can start to set up some shared services agreements, because we have a really couple great models already. Fire departments are one. The mutual aid agreements, most fire departments are, if Pulteney's dispatched, then Fairhaven, Castleton are already on their way going, right? So we have a good model for this. And the public works mutual aid agreements we established years ago, where if there's a disaster, your neighboring town can come do work and help bail you out and still get reimbursed by FEMA. So there's some good models, and we are going to continue to explore what's possible for these towns, because we need to provide some level of relief. The costs are just out of control. We were talking about fire departments, right? $600,000-$700,000 for a new truck. 27 towns can't possibly afford to do that. So, there's a lot of efficiencies. It's early days, but I'm excited about this select board meetup because just hearing and seeing these folks talk to each other and meet each other for the first time is incredible. So the next one will be in July. We are limiting participation to only select board members. And if the town hosting has a town manager, they join as well. But it's been a great effort, and I really kudos to VLCT for coming up with that idea.
Yeah, and you start thinking about, things as simple as printers or paper, or, things that every municipality needs and uses, and you get a much better price if instead of it being just Pulteney or just Middletown Springs buying it, if the order comes in with 27, the manufacturer can say, well, tell you what, I'll give you 20% off, and that saves on everything. I don't know how wide you want to go, because at some point then, as you point out, you got to have somebody get it delivered to them, and they're responsible for making sure the rest of the towns get it. So, a
great example of that is, it came up a lot that salt and sand for town garages. Oh, that'd be great to bulk buy and share. Well, how are we going to do that? Are you going to be measuring trucks? Do you have to get a scale? Some logistics don't sort of sugar out, but a lot do. So, we're going to continue to investigate this and do some formal assessments of what's possible. So, and another thing towns often don't understand is they're political subdivisions of the state of Vermont. state of Vermont gets these deals with Dell and with, Canon and all these companies, towns can access that deal, but often it's not well understood. There's not good training or access. So maybe this is a way to get them on board.
And speaking of training, I know that's part of being in municipal government is to kind of figure out the landscape and figure out how to get things done. Mm-hmm. And you guys are doing some trainings too, right?
Yeah, we are. We have 3 big trainings coming up. The first of which is actually next week, next Wednesday and Thursday, April 16th and 17th. We're holding a single-day training over 2 days to allow for greater participation on Act 181 that we talked about earlier. And this is sort of a precursor to those town meetings where we'll be going over the future land use maps, but also to get towns to really understand what the advantages are so they can begin to position themselves to take full advantage of the opportunities and make sure that they have all the requisite sort of requirements for accessing those exemptions. So that will be in the evening for towns, but it's open to the entire public to join, and really we'll be focusing on Act 250 designations and future land use maps. So we're excited about that. And then, of course, we'll be holding our 3rd annual open meeting law training with the Secretary of State, Sarah Copeland-Hanses. So they've been gracious enough to come down to Rutland for the past 2 years and offer this open meeting law training. And it comes at a really good time. We try to time it always around May or June for all those new select board members that were voted in on town meeting day, and as a refresher for the returning members as well. Because, as you know, your committee last year, of course, you weren't on it last year, but big changes to open meeting law that came with a lot of big requirements for towns to comply. So, we're excited about this training because ultimately, in my mind, open meeting law it's not just going through the motions. It's enabling good citizen participation and allowing democracy in action. So we're not enforcers. We don't tattle on towns. We don't do anything other than help them comply with the laws by giving all the resources that they can get. So we're really fortunate that the Secretary of State is so hands-on and willing to come down. So that one will be on May 7th, Wednesday, at the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. And again, it's open to everybody because we know there's a lot of boards and bodies that are subject to open meeting law, like our library trustees and our water districts and everything in between. So all are welcome. And I think last year we had 60 participants, both virtual and in person. So we expect it will be a big turnout again.
My afternoon committee now is government operations, and we did pass a few tweaks. Mm-hmm. I don't know which chamber to blame. I think it was the House last year. The Senate passed something that, and you mentioned public body, so even something as granular as a cemetery commission, which might have 2 or 3 members,
right,
if they go on a field trip, they were actually going to have to be required to keep notes, to keep minutes.
And record it as well.
And record it. So that is gone. We took that into the Senate Government Operations Committee. It's now in the House. I don't think they're going to put that back in. We tried to figure out, and this happens all the time, to my chagrin, we'll pass something, and then a year or 2 later, somebody will say, well, did you ever think of this? As an unintended consequence.
Right.
And this was one of those things that the Senate, when it left the Senate a couple of years ago, it didn't have that requirement. The House, for some reason, put it back in. And so people were saying, are you kidding? We're going to go out in a field here to survey something, and we have to actually record it. So that we did do away with that. There were a couple other minor tweaks to it, which I can't remember exactly, but it hasn't passed yet because it's still in the House committee. But I think it will, and as far as I know, the governor's not going to. That won't be on his top 10 list of veto. So I think that will become law.
He's got a big list, so that won't be one of them, and that is good because logistically, it just presents another challenge for towns. So that, to me, is a good, sensible in my mind, that's more of a technical correction anyways,
and we redefined the term public bodies too. There was some confusion about that, and I think it simplified things. And I'm like you. I think people should be accountable if they're representing other people and the ability for the general populace to sort of figure out what's going on. But, it got to be almost ridiculous if you have a 3-member select board and they all show up at the general store in that community at the same time. They literally couldn't start talking to each other almost because they'd be in violation of the open meeting law. And so I think we've tweaked that to the point where that's not going to be an issue. I mean, it really got pretty ridiculous to me. It'd be one thing if they met in aisle 4 and decided on public policy.
Yes, absolutely.
And then when the next meeting came, to everybody's surprise, well, it's already been decided. Well, how did that happen?
Right.
But it also put, I think, an unfair burden on, and you know what's going to happen? Eventually, people say, well, then I won't be on the select board. I'll do something else.
Yeah, and that's already a huge problem.
It is.
That came up at our select board meetup the other day where one of the select board members said, look around the room, folks. I'm 65 years old, and most of you are older than me. And we are going to have a problem if we make it so difficult and unattractive that we can't recruit that next generation. And we need to. Yeah,
there's middle ground there. There really is. You can't not let people know what you're doing, but at the same time, if you and I were a 2-member public body of something, and to not be able to say anything to you is just absolutely ludicrous to me. But anyway.
Absolutely.
So we had VLCT last week, or by the time you hear it, it'll be the week before, so 2 weeks ago. And we began to talk also, a charter is no longer required for a municipality to adopt a local option tax. We did away with that a couple of years ago, which again I think is fair. We're a Dillon's Rule state, so the only thing a community can do is put it into a charter and then get the legislative approval or not. And that was one that I felt strongly that it was probably a good thing. Excuse me, if Community A wants to impose a local options tax on folks, and I live in Rutland Town and we have one, and then you have to earmark it for a specific reason in terms of where you're going to spend that money. And it's usually 1%. You can do that, and you can do it just on alcohol. You can do it on sales. You can do it on whatever you want.
Yeah, rooms and meals.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the percentage right now in law is 70% stays with the local community that has done the tax. 30% goes to state government in Montpelier. The proposal, and I think it will pass, and again, it's in my committee and it's still active right now, is to increase that to 75-25. So that the local municipality gets to keep 5% more. Unfortunately, the state gets 5% less. So you're you're creating a hole on one side. And there's even a move to make it 80-20. And I don't know whether there'll be appetite for that.
I would love that.
You could make a pretty good case for that.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize there's $14 million in surplus funds at the state level as it's been generating right along. Now what do we do with that? And VLCT, I think, was in favor of giving that back to the same communities that, in essence, had generated that amount of revenue. One of the committee members said, yeah, but that's really not fair because when they started off, they knew it was going to be 70-30, and there wasn't any provision to take the surplus and give it back. But I think we're going to, again, legislation sometimes a compromise. I think we're going to find out that it's going to continue to be a surplus every year because more and more towns are adopting local option taxes. I think there's 4 of them that will probably, I think Ludlow's one, will be doing that this year. Sorry, folks in Ludlow, that you didn't know you're going to get another tax. But, I think it's only fair to return it too, because I don't know what else are we going to do with it? It just sort of sits in a pot somewhere and doesn't do anybody any good.
Absolutely, and tax relief is the name of the game right now. We only have 4 towns in the region, Killington, Brandon, Rutland Town, Rutland City, that have some form of option tax. I think it's really funny too, Brian. to require the locality to have this capital improvement plan tied to the money, and yet the state has this surplus and no plan to use it. Yeah. But even so, that is encouraging to know that it's generating that level, because again, there's a lot of confusion when towns weigh local option taxes as to who pays it, and largely it is paid by visitors, not by the local folks. In Rutland City, they're the most recent. I think theirs was 2023. Yeah. And they blew their early forecasts out of the water. I think they're generating over $1.5 million a year from that. That's $1.5 million that isn't coming from local property tax. And big stuff can happen with that money. So I'm hopeful that if this change does happen, it will encourage some more towns in our region to weigh the option tax.
I could predict it'll be at least 75-25. Yep. Whether we can get to 80-20 or not, I don't know. But and I think, has that already passed the House? I can't remember which way it's coming, but anyway, I'm pretty sure we can do something to help out. Speaking of funding, well, we probably need to take our second break first. When we come back, we've seen continued anxiety and angst and uncertainty with respect to the federal funding in so many areas in the state. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we come back here on Catamount Community Connection. Again, we're speaking with Devon Neary, who is the Executive Director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore, your host of the program, and it's brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society. Now I've got the RPC in my brain. And that the group there has brought you this program since we've been doing it, basically. And we've been doing the Vermont State Fair here in Rutland since 1846. We're already looking forward to the 179th Fair coming up in August. In fact, the dates, if you want to write them down, August 12th through the 16th, down at the fairgrounds, the Vermont State Fair here in Rutland. Speaking of that, we can probably talk a little bit about some of the bills which are still active. One of them is there's a couple of them. I don't know how much success we're going to have. I would like to see the Vermont State Fair grandfathered in terms of the 3-acre rule. In past shows, we've explained why. They're in a very unique, different position than every other fair. They're surrounded by private property, so they can't just build a retention pond because they don't have enough room to do that. Well, if they did, they'd have to take out all the rides. Mm-hmm. And without the rides, the fair wouldn't be as successful. So I think there's a way to at least take them out of that picture. Some of the other fairs, Addison is moving along. Champlain Valley Fair up at Chittenden County is also doing pretty well, and even the Orleans Fair is doing okay in terms of meeting the 3-acre rule. So I'd like to see that happen. There are a couple other bills. One of them pushes the effective dates of the 3-acre implementation out, I think 3 or 4 years, just allowing people a little bit more time to kind of figure out how they're going to fit into the mitigation efforts. And there's one that would repeal it. I don't probably see that as happening, because if you did that, the EPA would be knocking on the door the next day and saying, wait a minute, we had a deal. You told us you were going to take the TMDL for Lake Champlain down, and your plan was to do it with this thing, and now you're changing it. So, but that's a big one. There are private property owners that are into that. Municipalities, if the school has a 3-acre parking lot, that's impervious surface, and that'll have to be taken into consideration. So I don't know how many people are even aware of it still, even though this goes back some 10, 15 years. Yeah, but that's one of them that we have to kind of deal with. Yeah, and that one, I think our records indicate it impacts 90 properties in the Rutland region, and they range, like you said, from schools to private businesses and hospitals and everything in between. 3-acre rule to me is a shotgun approach, and it really sort of blankets everyone under the same conditions, which is surprising only in that the water quality effort by and large has been really a scientific effort by the Agency of Natural Resources. So to hear this 3-acre rule and how it's been rolled out and implemented and
to this day, like you said, years into it, we still have property owners who have no idea what it is.
Yep.
The Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, VAPTA, we have a government relations committee. We just submitted testimony last week to really encourage the legislative study language in the draft bill that should look at, we believe, two considerations. One is this 3-acre rule should only apply if the property is hydrologically connected. If the property is directly discharging into one of our surface waters, then fine. It can be similar to the municipal roads general permit, which looks at road erosion into ditches and streams. The rule only applies if the road is directly connected or discharging into a stream. So why not apply that same concept? And the next idea we have is natural resource-based solutions like floodplain restoration and those things in the periphery of our downtowns and villages in our more rural areas should count towards the 3-acre rule. Because frankly, like you said, for the property at the state fairgrounds, they're not the only one that they just physically and logistically can't fit a remediation or mitigation technology or project within their property. So what are they supposed to do? Yeah. And the cost is extreme.
It's about
we're talking
$3.4 million is what I heard.
Yeah, and some of these are nonprofits. They're barely making ends meet. So that is it's not realistic. I know one other sort of thing that's been floating around, and I want to say it was in one of the draft bills, looked at regional stormwater infrastructure. Mm-hmm. That model is extreme. It would really require more regional consideration, but it is a thought that's a little bit different. And to me, it reminds me of the effort right now happening at Vermont state airports where we're pre-permitting hangar development, because right now at the Rutland airport, there's several folks who want to build hangars like today. And for a lot of people don't realize the amount of traffic that comes into Rutland airport for private jets and airplanes, and they immediately leave. They will touch down, drop their passengers, and go to Glens Falls or Lebanon to spend all their money. And they're spending a lot of money on refueling and everything else. Right now, one of the concepts is that the hangar developers will have to be responsible for all the stormwater and infrastructure around that, even though it will be shared by the other developers. So we're sort of trying to encourage, hey, does it make sense for the state to build this and then lease that out to make it much more clean and simple like other states do? So it's a similar effort, and it really comes down to who bears the costs and why, and are we impeding development by making those costs too great?
We're talking to Devon Neary, who is the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. We could talk about some of the other bills that are still in play. There's a housing bill, which we just took a look at. There's also, and this was the biggest issue coming into the session, education plan for the reformation therein. And the House has sort of dragged its feet, to be perfectly blunt. They haven't done anything really, except by the time you hear this, 2 weeks ago, they did finally pass a bill and send it over to the Senate. Yeah. And so it'll be looked at by the Senate Education Committee in the remaining weeks of the session to see what happens. It looks like, and again, that's the danger of recording a show a couple of weeks ahead. It looks like the governance piece of it, in other words, the districts, the actual maps of how many supervisory unions and districts there'll be, will not be done this year. The formula probably will, and then we can begin to take a look at how many districts there are. The governor's proposed 5. The Senate did have a map with 9 districts statewide, and I don't know what the right number is. Nobody does yet. Mm-hmm. It'll all kind of be an evolution. So those are the two things that are coming up. We did mention just kind of tangentially here the federal funding. And again, that's the danger of recording something. By the time this is even put in the can to air in a week, there could be a new tariff situation developing at the federal level, or some more cuts, or maybe the restoration of some funds that have been cut. So I don't know. It comes up almost every day in committee, in both committees. I'm in the Senate Agriculture in the morning and Senate Government Operations in the afternoon. And every day someone will say, because they're all the agencies are in asking for their funding for next year. And they say, well, yeah, but we're probably not going to get this from Uncle Sam anymore. Is there anything you could do at the state level? It's really it's a puzzle still.
Yeah, a lot of hands out and a lot of uncertainty, even in our realm. So, we initially saw a few small buckets of funding immediately canceled from our work that related around energy and climate. And, those were two areas that we knew were going to be really vulnerable to federal cuts. Luckily, our budget was able to handle that reduction. However, it's unfortunate because both of those programs were going to be really, really valuable for the region, especially the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. It's a grant annual from the feds, from the Department of Energy, that was going to allow us to look at thermal energy networks and geothermal in the region, which we have a ton of potential for. So that's unfortunate. But last week, we got the most unfortunate news, which was we knew that FEMA was on the chopping block for the federal administration, and we just got word that the BRIC, the Building Resiliency in Communities program, which funds a lot of our scoping studies and local hazard mitigation planning, that program was canceled for FY24, which the feds are a year behind, and canceled any projects that are awarded for FY23. So this is our number one funding source to update local hazard mitigation plans. And what's unfortunate is, our fear is that these plans are more than just a plan. They also reduce the town's ERAF rating, which allows them, when there's a federal disaster declared, their reimbursement rate increases. So there's actual huge, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of implications here. And I'm confused as to why it's happening, only in that we're seeing significant disasters. We just saw what happened in the Midwest and earlier in the year in the South and last year in Vermont, and God forbid we don't see another one this summer. But by all accounts, we're probably going to see something, and it flies in the face of the reality of the situation, which is we need more mitigation and adaptation funding and planning, because our communities are very vulnerable. So we're hopeful that, we'll be able to still support these efforts and programs, but we've also been informed that our emergency management planning program, which is a longstanding program on the RPC, may be shuttered as well. Let's hope not. I'm trying to remain as positive as possible and not react until we get clear news from the feds that a program is being canceled. But it is a concern. And I think where I'm seeing it play out the most with towns is the uncertainty, the unknown, because the biggest project cancellation we've seen so far is the federal raise grant for Killington Road. That was $25 million that was awarded to the town that was pulled back. Luckily, they're still going to pursue the project, and they have the TIF funding to support it. But, that was $25 million that wasn't going to be borne by the town taxpayers in the region ultimately. So, we're hopeful that we can weather these storms and continue to provide the same level of service for the region, and make sure that we're pursuing as many federal grant dollars as possible to reduce the local tax burden. So more to come on that.
Yeah. Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left to this week's program. Again, we're talking to Devon Neary, who is the Executive Director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, or is sometimes known as RPC. Their master plan will be out later this spring and early summer. You will be able to take a look at a very granular level or a little bit higher level and make comments on it. There'll be some public engagement to kind of finalize things, and then the board, which consists 27 members, will finally get together and figure out how to adopt all the provisions herein, and so be looking for that. Is there anything else you wanted to mention in the last couple of minutes that we have?
No, just to keep folks aware of what's going on. We try to be as engaged as possible, but you can always find information at our website, rutlandrpc.org. Find us on Facebook, and check out our regional plan dedicated website, which is Plan 2026 at rutlandrpc.org. That's our email. Sorry, rutlandrpc.org/plan 2026. So a big thank you to everyone who's been a part of this plan and provided feedback up to this point. We're really excited to chart a new course and have a new vision for the region that hopefully supports a lot of development and services that will benefit everybody.
Was there anything that surprised you about some of the data that came back in the final minute here?
Oh, man. Yeah. I could spend the entire hour, but ultimately what was surprising has been the perception of the way things are by even me and everyone like you that lives in the region versus what the data suggests. One of which was around farming, for instance, that in 2002, we had 623 farms. In 2023, we had 624 farms. Now, granted, the dynamics and the sizes of those farms have changed dramatically, but and a lot less dairy farms, right? A lot less. But, it shows that there is still an agricultural sector in this region that we didn't expect. And of course, the other is housing. Those were really surprising statistics. Knowing that we need now 8,000 to 16,000 units was really surprising. And then lastly, the data that am still shocked about is, out of the 2,000 businesses in the region, more than 1,500 of them employ 5 people or less. So, the region is largely made up of small businesses. Now, that being said, the top 10 employers employ about 25% of the region. So, there's this huge discrepancy of, we have these huge employers like GE and the Regional Medical Center. Then we have everybody else in between. And I think that shows the strength of the local economy as being like pretty dynamic and pretty resilient overall. Well,
I am surprised about the farming thing, because sitting in the agriculture committee, I especially dairy, I'm sure what happens is they get bigger.
Yes.
But I am surprised, because if you had asked me, I would have said, we probably lost another 20% of the farms.
At least,
But apparently we didn't. Okay. Devon Neary, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are going to have you back in the spring for sure.
You bet. Thank you, Brian. And thank you for all the work you're doing up in Montpelier. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see all of you next week here on Catamount Community Connection.